This is the Trusting Our Men interview series, where I explore and unpack what is still stopping us from cultivating trust, partnership, and safety with our men. Join me and my co-host Madelyn Moon as we have difficult conversations with conscious men in hopes of building a bridge of more compassion and understanding. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trusting Our Men again. I'm Nadia, your host for this interview series, and I'm here with John Kim today, who has the blog and now the big website, The Angry Therapist. I'm so excited to have him here. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
Yes, I'm so excited to jam with you. So I have actually known John and his work for quite a while now, and I would say that I'll do a slightly more formal intro, although it's still not super formal. But I just wanted to share with everyone that, John actually was a really big inspiration for moving me into the coaching world. So it's really exciting to come back sort of, 6 years later or so, circle back and talk about this conversation, which is so near and dear to my heart. So let me tell you guys a little bit about John if you don't already know him. So as he was going through an expired relationship, John Kim created a blog on Tumblr and titled his first post, My Fucking Feelings, which is probably why you now understand why I gravitated towards his work. He named his blog The Angry Therapist and started to document his journey post-divorce. Even though he was a licensed therapist, John chose not to present himself that way. He wore t-shirts and jeans. He preferred the language of Me Too as opposed to You Should. And he blogged about his shortcomings, revelations, and his views on relationships, the self-help business, and the world. He found CrossFit, bought a motorcycle, and started coaching people in an unconventional way. Awesome.
Man, that feels like it was so long ago.
So what feels a little different to you now?
So I don't really have a practice anymore. So I'm doing a lot of stuff like podcasting and content and, writing books and stuff. That's one of the biggest differences is that, I'm helping people, I think still unconventionally, but through my tone and perspective, not so much taking people into CrossFit boxes and walking with them around lakes, etc. So.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah. So the first thing that we like to ask everyone on this interview series is, what is really present for you? What is current for you right now in the realm of gender relations?
Well, first I want to say I love the title, Trusting Men Again. And I like that you put the word again because it means there's hope. It means that there's a return, As far as gender roles, I think we're very thirsty for new definitions, and I think that right now is the best time to start encouraging ourselves to redefine ourselves, redefine everything from love down, roles, gender roles, etc., stuff in the workplace, everything off the heels of the Me Too movement. Although this book is kind of written for men, it's also for women too. And I think that right now it's a really great time for men to kind of look inward, to challenge, their definitions of what a man looks like, right? So it's actually an exciting time.
Yeah. Agreed. And do you think that there's anything with regards to gender relations as well? So I love that you heard gender roles because that's such an important piece of the conversation. And we're also speaking to what just the energy and the mindset and sort of the change in relationship that is happening amongst people who do identify as man or woman.
I think that obviously, I think there's more room to be less judgmental. I think there's a shakeup in a standard that's kind of coming, it's like a wave that's washing over us. And if you just even look, as far back as like 7, 8, 9 years, people had more rigid definitions and shoulds. And I think today, it's great that we're more open to gender relations in general, everything I think even from politics down, It's and also like in movies and in culture, in restaurants, in fitness classes, gender relations is now, I think, kind of hitting mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's great. It's also bringing up a lot in people who have resistance toward it. So
Yeah. So my whole impetus with starting this conversation is because I had so many men privately message me, so friends, colleagues, post me too, who were really concerned with how to show up in the world now, because the rules are changing, which is all wonderful, and I'm sure we're all a fan of that. And at the same time, I felt so much compassion for their journey. Because if you've been following a certain rule book for a really long time and those rules suddenly change, what was starting to happen was there was all these men coming to me going, I just feel like I need to completely go asexual. I need to completely turn down the volume on my primal sexuality or any sexual urges. And what really stood out to me there is that, I've been working with women now for quite a few years in the realm of getting them to reclaim their sexuality and their sensuality. And so here I was seeing men starting to have this issue post Me Too. So even though it's coming from a good intention, and there's important social change that's happening here, the consequence has become such an extreme version of fear in the men that I was seeing a same trend happening, where the patriarchy and the system that we have was actually now, or maybe post-patriarchy, I'm not really sure, we can discuss it, was starting to squish and squelch this natural urge that we all have. But now it was happening for the men in a different context. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, and if you've been noticing that as well.
I don't think it's about turning anything down. I don't think it's about cold showers. If you take women, and if that was one person, and you take men, and that was one person, and let's say they're in a relationship, the thing about the Me Too is a lot of women who are angry and not feeling heard. So instead of turning something down, I think it's about men creating a space for women to be heard, and it's not about fixing things. It's not about solutions. It's about actually hearing everyone who is, has struggled with any kind of sexual assault or anything like that. And just saying that I hear you, practicing empathy. And I think that's what bridges. I think that's what produces glue, and for everyone to get on the same team. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about denying sexuality. It's not, because then what you're also doing is you're then not standing on your truth. And then if you do, because of the temperature or the what's going on in society, if you decide to turn yourself down, make yourself lukewarm, deny your sexuality, there's going to be anger, resentment toward that. So it's just going to like shift from women to men, And so I think it's about compassion. I think it's about hearing people, understanding people, and actually like pulling from our hearts, And I think that's what's going to get. That's what's going to make it not about genders, but about being human.
Yeah, I love that, being human. And so if a guy were to come to you, whether it's a friend or a client, and was having this issue, was feeling like, okay, in the past I never had a problem connecting to the beast in me, so to speak. And now I'm feeling I need to really tone it down, and I'm very confused by how to go about it in my current relationship. What's one tool or one piece of advice that you would give?
To actually communicate, to practice vulnerability, to start with where you're at. So if that person was feeling like he needs to tone something down or tame his quote unquote beast, then that's his truth, and that's where the communication starts, right? And then hopefully his partner will understand him, and they could have a conversation about why he needs to do that or what that looks like. And maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe he'll realize that it's not about toning anything down, but it's about acceptance.
What about the women's role in all of this? So, I feel like the key with any sort of communication, what I've been seeing a lot is this parallel between collective and individual, where a lot of the trends that are showing up in the conversations, especially with regards to gender relations, because it's a pretty hot topic right now, um, has been one where we're seeing a lot of anger, but then also a lot of, misunderstanding, just sort of like everyone's hot-headed and not really moving forward. And it seems like the same tools that we use for communication in our one-on-one are not being used in the collective. So for me, I find that yes, although there may be in this situation a lot of burden on the men, that it's also really important that women play their part and hold themselves accountable in the communication there. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts as a man as to what
Yes.
women can do to make this conversation easier.
What works for me in my relationships, not only intimate, but with friendships, any relationship. And I think what I try to coach my clients is uh, try to understand before trying to be understood. And I don't think it's a man or woman thing, but if you do that, um, whether we're talking about gender relations or, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. It's about trying to understand the person, their situation, their feelings, their stance, their perspective before you try to be understood. And I think if everyone did that, then there's connection. There's a human connection, not so much people trying to convince other people what things should look like. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing that came to my mind is if we could all try to understand each other before trying to get others to understand us, that could change the world.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And what would you advise for people who are well intentioned, who are following you like rationally, like, oh, everything you're saying makes sense, but then we get into the moment and there's triggers of trauma that come up,
Sure.
and suddenly there isn't an ability to stick to the plan of, okay, I'm going to be rational and listen and communicate with a soft voice and all the other things that you're quote unquote supposed to do.
Yeah, I don't think it's about communicating with a soft voice. I think it's about being very aware of what comes up, not suppressing or denying that. So if it is anger or trauma or stuff that's tied to your story in your past, that's honest and that's truthful, right? But there's a difference between being aware of something like feelings and acting on stuff, right? So I think the behavior shouldn't be destructive, and you should be able to respond instead of react. But I think it's okay to experience and accept the feelings that come up, right? And it's basically what we do with those feelings. And I think this is a great opportunity for everyone to actually start to process the stirring. I think when something like this happens in the world and there's some kind of shakeup, I think what's great about this is it stirs the pot, it brings feelings up, and it makes us realize that we're human. It makes us realize that we have stuff and it's okay to feel things.
Mm. What about like our collective nervous system? I find that we're in a state, there's a variety of variables, in particular in the Western world, and even more in particular in the US, although we're not necessarily just speaking to that, but you and I both live in the US, so it's definitely our reality. How do you think all these other variables that are sort of creating this like heightened sense of like fight or flight at all times? Like I feel like the entire country is just in fight or flight. How do you think that affects these, the more individual interactions here?
That makes people reactive. I think whenever we are in a fight or flight state, it's definitely a lower frequency, and I think it makes us chasing instead of attracting, if that makes sense, right? It makes us exchange. Sometimes it makes us exchange our truth for membership. It makes us desperate. It makes us do things that we may regret because we're in survival mode. So to actually take a breath and not not believe that the sky is falling because of what's happening in the world. And then if we also take a bigger step back, we may realize that there's also a lot of great things happening, everything from health to mental health to our advancement in technology, etc. And the commercialization of wellness and everything from what we're eating to how we're moving. We've come such a long way that we're thinking about all that, and we're just holding on to maybe some political things or other conversations where there's just a lot of emotion, and that creates your fight or flight to set off, and then us to be in a panic state. I don't think the sky is falling. I don't think that, the world is coming to an end, and that's a choice. And I think that if you believe that, you can kind of pull away from being in such a panic state where you're just going to be a walking knee jerk in a reaction.
Mm. Well, I mean, part of it too, maybe the challenge for people is less about, like, they know that the world isn't falling apart because we're clearly getting all these reports that actually the quality of our life is getting better and better. But what's also happening, there's this book just started reading called The Coddling of the American Mind. And I forget the authors right now, but I'll make sure to post it below the video. But in the piece that I've already cracked open, they're talking about this culture of getting offended and overly protecting the younger generations. And what's actually happening is it's creating an inability for us to be resilient humans. And they use a peanut allergy as an example. So this idea that, now there's so many schools that are peanut free, and there's a lot of areas that are peanut free because so many Americans have peanut allergies. But when they actually did some studies with two different groups, what they found was that the people who were exposed to peanuts had a much lower like as kids, they had a much lower frequency of getting an allergy versus the ones that were not exposed had a much higher chance of getting it. So there's this interesting discussion about how things like making, college campuses, these spaces where certain speakers can't come to speak, or having there be certain topics that are not allowed in curriculums anymore, that all of this culture of, people coming and saying, this is, you got to put trigger warnings on everything, right? Like all of this stuff, their argument is that actually maybe this isn't the best thing for us as a human experience, because if we don't get our hands dirty, if we don't go through the pain, if we don't get triggered, we're actually going to end up just being unable to survive in life because there is so much shit that's thrown at you.
Yeah, this reminds me, I don't know where I read this, but how parents are so protective today of their children that, because I grew up eating dirt and, roaches and falling off my skateboard and breaking my face. And that creates resiliency. And I think the parents today, because they're so protective of their children, them getting sick, etc. Plus the children living a life online where they're not outside, barefoot and climbing trees. That kind of safety is making us unsafe, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. And I totally see that. I also think that if you choose to live that way, you're actually creating your own prison. So you're not going on any kind of journey that's going to stretch you. You are living in safety, which will stunt your growth. And ultimately, you're like creating a monster that's like a shadow that's cast by your own hand. You know what I'm saying? I think you actually face the world, to live it, to have, go through feelings, to look inward, to go out and play, and to actually do things that make you feel alive. That's where the nectar is. And I think that's where life lives. And so, yeah, I agree with you. People are scaring themselves by living sheltered in a way. And I think that's also happening. Yeah.
And I totally agree. And here we are talking about this with individual growth, which I think is, one piece of it. And then my sense is it's exactly the same thing when we move into relations, right? Specifically amongst women and men, where there is sort of the culture of offense is being taken so extreme, or the culture of like instant gratification and like this safety bubble. I just a week ago, for the first time ever, started online dating, like put up an online profile. And it's been a really interesting social experiment because, same thing. It's like, there's literally like, you have someone's attention for like 5 seconds, right?
Yeah.
And there is also this instant like, oh, if this doesn't work for me 100% in every way from the very beginning, great, I can just keep swiping. There's an infinite number of faces that I can get. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on how that us becoming more like instant gratification and safety oriented is actually really killing our ability to deepen intimacy in relations.
Yeah, 100%. I think we're dehumanizing ourselves. And I think one of the things that I've always been um, talking about, the flag that I've been waving, the big macro thing is to humanize ourselves. And going back to, that very first post, My Fucking Feelings, that was my attempt at humanizing me. And also as a therapist, showing people that I am in fact, human and have problems and going through a divorce and etc. I think with swipe culture, with filters, there's a lot of presentation, there's a lot of false advertising, and there's a lot of clicking on things where we are very dismissive of humans, and we lose a lot of that real human engagement. Instead of asking someone on a date and sitting down with them and having dinner, you're now like, humans have become baseball cards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we're also not learning how to be social, and this is why we ghost, because we don't have tools and courage to actually tell people how we feel. This is why people don't make reservations on dates. This is why people don't buy flowers and wash their cars. I think dating is dying, and it's because of swipe culture. So yeah, I'm a little bit old school, and I'd love to bring it back where a date is like an event and it's exciting, and we actually have a human exchange instead of thinking about all the options if this doesn't work, and making it about metrics and numbers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How is it for you? Are you enjoying the online dating or not so much?
Not so much. I'm
Yeah.
enjoying I'm enjoying the information I am learning about other, like, just so it's like sort of the macro social experiment is very fascinating for me, how people are responding these days.
Yeah.
When I entered my last relationship, Tinder didn't even exist yet. Most apps didn't exist yet. So it's a very new experience. One that I avoided for about 16 months, and then finally said, don't shit on it until you try it, which I did. And I am. So I think that, even before getting on the app, it was quite clear to me, just watching documentaries about online dating and just understanding, collecting information from friends who were having experiences, that of course it was dehumanizing us the same way all other social media does. I'm really fascinated by how this is changing our neurology in such a way that it's becoming really difficult for people to sit in difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And
We're not exercising that muscle.
not exercising that muscle. And so what's happening, the combination of that and this feeling like the overly righteousness of being offended, which in my opinion is getting a little too extreme, not because everyone has the right to get offended, and there's places where it totally makes sense to have righteous rage, 100%. And there's a place to be in righteous rage and also to listen, like you were saying. And so that's where I'm most fascinated about. And I'm curious if it's coming up for you a lot with the people you interact with in your community and clients and whatnot.
Yeah. And I think when everyone believes that they're, when they're very, very sensitive on offense, and they are overly quote unquote offended, it's almost like then they leave no room for us to just be ourselves, right? It's like we're on high alert. And I think if you continue to be overly offended, etc., about everything, then again you're creating a wall, you're creating a filter, you're creating distance, and people are going to be walking on eggshells. It's like the relationship of the couple who, because there's a lot of tension in the room, they're not themselves, right? They're not able to just truly lean in and kind of melt into each other and be their selves. So I think the world needs a dose of that, of just putting the guards down and being yourself and not walking on eggshells.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, I want to emphasize to everyone listening and watching as well, that this really is because the ultimate intention is to build a bridge. The ultimate intention is for everyone to win here, and for us to walk away, because everyone wants to have more hot sex. Everyone wants to feel more heard and seen. and everyone wants more compassionate communication. And I think what's happening is there's this need for that, and yet what we're not being able to figure out how to actually, we're keep bumping up against it with all these other pieces. So
Yeah, I know. I think that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, everyone has the right to be offended. I want to make sure to clarify that everyone has the right to their feelings and their experience, especially when there's a historical oppression involved. And I think the key is, well, when we look at the future, what are we going to do to actually change it? The same way you're in a cup, if you're just fighting with your partner, you can be angry at something that they did, and you can have your feelings. And the question is, do you want to stay there, or do you want to move forward? And what's the answer to moving forward is you need to take a moment and actually hear each other.
Yeah, going back to that whole thing of trying to understand before trying to be understood. If you can do that and do it honestly, that will neutralize and that will humanize you, and that will create a bridge to whoever's in front of you, whether it's one person or societies.
Yes. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.
For everyone listening and joining us, to get more information on John's work, head on over to theangrytherapist.com, and we'll have all the links above, on the side, below, wherever we end up having it.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Nadia.
much.
What a great conversation you're creating. So I applaud you for that.
Thanks for joining us.